Chapter 13 of Inspector French and the Cheyne Mystery by Freeman Wills Crofts. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Atul Sharma, Winnipeg, Canada. Inspector French takes charge. Cheyne was ushered into a small, plainly furnished room, in which at a table desk was seated a rather stout, clean-shaven man with a cheerful, good-humoured face and the suggestion of a twinkle about his eye. He stood up as Cheyne entered, looked him over critically with a pair of very keen, dark blue eyes, and then smiled. "Mr. Maxwell Cheyne," he said genially, "I am Inspector French. You wish to consult us? Now just sit down there and tell me your trouble, and we'll do what we can for you." His manner was kindly and pleasant, and did much to set Cheyne at his ease. The young man had been rather dreading his visit, expecting to be met with the harsh, incredulous, unsympathetic attitude of officialdom. But this inspector, with his easy manners and his apparently human outlook, was quite different from his anticipation. He felt drawn to him, and realized with relief that at least he would get a sympathetic hearing. "Thank you," he said, trying to speak calmly. "It's very good of you, I'm sure. I'm in great trouble. Not about myself, that is, but about my friend, a lady, Miss Joan Merrill. I'm afraid she is in terrible danger, if indeed it is not too late." "Tell me the details." The man was all attention, and his quiet, decisive manner induced confidence. Curbing his impatience, Cheyne related his adventures. In the briefest outline, he told of the drugging in the Plymouth Hotel, of the burglary at Warren Lodge, of his involuntary trip on the Enid, of his journey to London and his adventure in the house in Hopefield Avenue. Then he described Joan Merrill's welcome intervention, his convalescence in the hospital, the compact between himself and Joan, his visit to Speedwell, and his burglary of Earlswood. He recounted Dangle's appearance as an envoy, the meeting with the gang, and the explosion at Euston, and finally voiced the terrible suggestion which this latter contained as to the possible fate of Joan. Inspector French listened to his recital with an appearance of the keenest interest. "You have certainly had an unusual experience, Mr. Cheyne," he remarked. "I don't know that I can recall a similar case. Now I think we may take it that Miss Merrill's safety is our first concern. We shall go out to this house, Earlswood, and see if we can learn anything about her there. The other activities of the gang must wait. Excuse me a moment." He gave some orders through his desk telephone, resuming, "I should think the house has probably been vacated. These people would cover their traces until they learned from the papers that you had been killed. However, we'll soon know that. Wait here until I arrange about warrants, and then we'll start." He disappeared for some minutes, while Cheyne fretted and chafed and tried to control his impatience. Then he returned, and slipping an automatic pistol into his pocket, invited Cheyne to follow him. He led the way downstairs and out into a courtyard in the great building. 2 motor cars were just drawing up at the curb, while at the same moment no less than 8 plainclothes men appeared from another door. The party having taken their places, the 2 vehicles slid out through a covered way into the traffic of the town. "We shall go round to Chelsea first," French explained, "and make sure there is no news of Miss Merrill." As they ran quickly through the busy streets, French asked a series of questions on points of Cheyne's statement upon which he desired further information. "If this trip draws blank, as I fear it will," he observed, "I shall want you to tell me your story again. This time with all the detail you can possibly put into it. For the moment, there's not time for that." At Horn Terrace, there was no trace or tidings of Joan. It was by this time 12:30, half an hour after the time at which Blessington had promised she should be there, and Cheyne felt all his forebodings confirmed. But he was not surprised, feeling but the more eager to push on to Wembley. On the way, French made him draw a sketch map of the position on Earlswood, and on nearing his goal he stopped the cars, and calling his men together, explained exactly what was to be done. Then, telling Cheyne to sit with the driver and direct him to the front gate, they again mounted and went forward. At a good rate they swung into Dalton Road, and Cheyne pointing the way, his car stopped at the gate, while the other ran on down the crossroad to the lane at the back. The men sprang out, and in less time than it takes to tell, the house was surrounded. Cheyne followed French as he hurried up to the door and gave a thundering knock. There was no answer, and walking round the house, the two men examined the windows. These being all fastened, French turned his attention to the back door, and after 2 or 3 minutes' work with a bunch of skeleton keys, the bolt shot back, and followed by Cheyne and 2 of his men, he entered the house. A short search revealed the fact that the birds had flown. Hurriedly it seemed, as everything had been left exactly as during Cheyne's visit. On the table in the sitting room stood the glasses from which they had drunk their whiskey. The box of cigars lay open beside them, and the chairs were still drawn up to the table. But there was no sign of Syme or Dangle, and a hurried look round revealed no clue to their whereabouts. "I feared as much," French commented as he sent a constable to call in the men who were surrounding the house. "But we still have 2 strings to our bow." He turned to the others and rapidly gave his orders. "You, Hingston and Tucker, remain here and arrest anyone who enters this house. Simmons, go to Lock Street off Southampton Row and find Speedwell of Horton and Lavender's detective agency. You know him, don't you? Well, find him and tell him this affair has developed into attempted murder and abduction. And ask him, can he give any information to the Yard? Tell him I'm in charge. The rest of you come with me to... What did Speedwell give you as Syme's address, Mr. Cheyne? All right, I have it here. To 12 Colton Street, Putney. We shall carry out the same plan there. Surround the house and then enter and search it. All got that? Come along, Mr. Cheyne." They hurried back to the cars and were soon running, somewhat over the legal speed, back to town. French, though he had shown energy enough at Earlswood, was willing to chat now in a pleasant, leisurely way, though he continued to interlard his remarks with questions on the details of Cheyne's story. Then he took over the tracing and examined it curiously. "I'll have a go at this later," he said as he put it in his pocket, "but I can scarcely believe they would have given you the genuine article." Cheyne would have questioned this opinion, reminding his companion he had seen the tracing pinned up to be photographed in the house in Hopefield Avenue. But just then they swung into Colton Street, and the time for conversation had passed. Contrary to his expectation, they ran past number 12 without slackening, turned down the first side street beyond it, and there came to a stand. "There's the end of the passage behind the house," French pointed when his men had dismounted. "Carter and Jones and Marshall, go down there and watch the back. No doubt you counted and know it's the 8th house. You other 2 men and you, Mr. Cheyne, come with me." He turned back into Colton Street, and with his 3 followers strode rapidly up to number 12. It was like its neighbors, a small 2-storied single terrace house of old-fashioned design. Indeed, the narrow road with its 2 grimy rows of almost working-class dwellings seemed more like one of those terrible streets built in the last century in the slum districts of provincial towns than a bit of mid-London. A peremptory knock from French producing no result, he had once more recourse to his skeleton keys. The door was easier to negotiate than the last, and in less than a minute it swung open and the 4 men entered the house. On the right of the hall was a tiny sitting room, and there they found the remains of what appeared to have been a hastily prepared meal. 4 chairs were drawn up to the small central table, on which were part of a loaf, butter, an empty sardine tin, eggshells, 2 cups containing tea leaves, and 2 glasses smelling of whiskey. French put his hand on the teapot. "Feel that, Mr. Cheyne," he exclaimed. "They can't be far away." The teapot was warm, and when Cheyne looked into the kitchen adjoining, he found that the kettle on the gas ring was also warm, though the ring itself had grown cold. If the 4 lunchers were Blessington and Company, as seemed indubitable, they must indeed be close by, and Cheyne grew hot with eager excitement as he thought that French and he might be within reasonable sight of their goal. Meanwhile, French and his men had carried out a rapid search of the house, without result except to prove that once more the birds had flown. But as to the direction which their flight had taken, there was no clue.
"I don't expect we'll see them back," French said to Cheyne, "but we must take no chances."
He turned to his men.
"Jones and Marshall, stay here in the house and arrest anyone who enters. You, Carter, make inquiries in these houses to the right, and you, Hobbs, do the same to the left. Come, Mr. Cheyne, you and I will try the other side of the street."
They crossed to the house opposite, and French knocked. The door was opened by a young woman who seemed thrilled by French's statement that he was a police officer making inquiries about the occupiers of number 12, but who was unable to give him any useful information about them. A man lived there. She believed his name was Syme, but she did not know either himself or anything about him. No, she hadn't seen any recent arrivals or departures. She had been engaged at the back of the house during the whole morning, and had not looked out across the street. Yes, she believed Syme lived alone except for an elderly housekeeper. As far as she knew, he was quite respectable. At least she had never heard anything against him. Politely thanking her, French tried the next house. Here he found a small girl who said she had looked out some half an hour previously and had seen a yellow motor standing before number 12, but she had not seen it arrive or depart, nor anyone get in or out. French tried 5 houses without result, but at the 6th he had a stroke of luck. In this house, it appeared that there was a chronic invalid, a sister of the woman who opened the door. This poor creature was confined permanently to bed, and in the hope of relieving the tedium of the days, she had had the bed drawn close to her window, so as to extract what amusement she could from the life of the street. If there had been any unusual happenings in front of number 12, she would certainly have witnessed them. Yes, the woman was sure her sister would see the visitors.
"Lucky chance, that,"
French said as they waited to know if they might go up.
"If this woman's eyes and brain are unaffected, she'll have become an accurate observer, and will probably learn all there is to know."
In a moment, the sister appeared beckoning, and going upstairs they found in a small front room a bed drawn up to the window, in which lay a superior-looking elderly woman with a pale, patient face lined by suffering, in which shone a pair of large, dark, intelligent eyes. She was propped up the better to see out, and her face lighted up with interest at her unexpected callers. As she lay down among the books on the coverlet, an intricate-looking piece of fancy sewing. Inspector French bowed to her.
"I'd like to say how much I appreciate your kindness in letting us come up, madam,"
he said with his pleasant, kindly smile.
"But when you hear that we are trying to find a young lady who we fear has been kidnapped, I am sure you will be glad to help us. The matter is connected with number 12 opposite. Can you tell me if any persons arrived or left it this morning?"
"Oh, yes, I can," the invalid replied in cultivated tones. A lady born, though fallen on evil days, thought Cheyne. "I like to watch the people passing, and I did notice arrivals and departures at number 12. About, let me see, 11:30, or perhaps a minute or two later, a motor drove up to number 12, a yellow car, fair size and covered in. 3 men got out and went into the house. One was Mr. Syme, who lives there. The others I didn't know. Mr. Syme opened the door with his latchkey. In a couple of minutes one of the strangers came out again, got into the car and drove off."
"That the car you saw outside Earlswood, Mr. Cheyne?"
asked French. Certain to be, Cheyne nodded. It was a yellow covered-in car of medium size, number XL7305.
"I didn't observe the number,"
the lady remarked.
The bonnet was facing towards me.
What was the driver like, madam? Queried Cheyne.
One of Mr. Syme's companions drove. He was short and rather stout, with a round face and what I believe is called a toothbrush mustache.
That's Blessington, all right. And was the third man of medium height and build, with a clean-shaven, somewhat rugged face?
Yes, that exactly describes him.
And that's Dangle. There's no question about the party, Inspector.
None. Then, madam, you saw? That, as I said, was about 11:30. About 1:30, the man you have called Blessington came back with the car. He got out, left it, and went into the house. In about a quarter of an hour, he came out again and started his engine. Then the other two men followed, assisting a young lady who appeared to be very weak and ill. She seemed scarcely able to walk, and they almost carried her. Another girl followed, who drew the door of the house after her.
Cheyne started on hearing these words, and looked with an agonized expression at the inspector. What were they like, these women? He breathed through his dry lips. But both men knew the answer. The girl assisted out by Simon Dangle was undoubtedly Joan Merrill, and the other equally certainly was Susan Dangle. She was lame, the one you thought ill, Cheyne persisted. She had twisted her ankle.
Perhaps so,
the lady returned.
But I do not think so. She seemed to me to step equally well on each foot. It was more as if she was half asleep, or very weak. Her head hung forward, and she did not seem to notice where she was going.
Cheyne made a gesture of despair. Heavens above, he cried hoarsely. What have they done to her?
Drugged her, French answered succinctly. But you should take courage from that, Mr. Cheyne. It looks as if they didn't mean to do her a personal injury. Yes, madam?
Before the invalid could speak, Cheyne went on, a puzzled note in his voice. But look here, he said slowly. I don't understand this. You say that the sick lady was wearing a fur coat?
Yes, a musquash fur.
But, he looked at French in perplexity. Miss Merrill has a fur coat like that. I've seen it. But she wasn't wearing it last night. Can it be someone else after all? His voice took on a dawning eagerness. French shook his head.
Don't build too much on that, Mr. Cheyne. They may have lent her a coat.
Yes, but why should they? She had a coat last night, a perfectly warm coat of brown cloth. She wouldn't want another.
Perhaps her own got muddy when she fell. We'll have to leave it at that for the moment. We'll consider it later. Let's get on now and hear what this lady can tell us. Yes, madam, if you please.
I am afraid there's not much more to be told.
All five got into the car and drove off. In which direction? Eastwards. That is to say, they have just left about half an hour. We were only 15 minutes behind them, Mr. Cheyne.
He got up to go, but the lady motioned him back to his seat.
There is one other thing I have just remembered, she said. It may or may not have something to do with the affair. Last night, it must have been about 11:30, I heard a motor in the street. It stopped for about 10 minutes, though the engine ran all the time, then went off again. I didn't look out, but now that I come to think about it, it sounded as if it might be standing at number 12. Of course, you understand that is only a guess, but motor cars are somewhat rare visitors to the street, and there may have been some connection. Extremely probable, I should think, madam, French commented. He rose. Now we must be off to act on what you have told us. I needn't say that you have placed us very greatly in your debt. It was but little I could do, the lady returned. I do hope you may be able to help that poor girl. I should be so glad to hear that she is all right.
Cheyne was touched by this unexpected sympathy. You may count on my letting you know, madam, he said, and then, thinking of the terribly monotonous existence led by the poor soul, he went on warmly. I should like, if I might, to call and tell you all about it, but if I am prevented, I shall certainly write. May I know what name to address to?
Mrs. Sproul, 17 Colton Street.
I should be glad to see you if you are in this district, but I couldn't think of taking you out of your way." A few moments later, French had collected his 3 remaining men and was being driven rapidly to the nearest telephone call office. There, he rang up the yard, repeated the descriptions of the car and of each of its occupants, and asked for the police force generally to be advised that they were wanted, particularly the men on duty at railway stations and wharves, not only in London but in the surrounding country.
"Now we'll have a shot at picking up the trail ourselves," he went on to Cheyne when he had sent his message. He re-entered the car, calling to the driver, "Get back and find the men on point duty round about Colton Street."
Of the 4 men they interviewed, 3 had not noticed the yellow car. The 4th, on a beat in the thoroughfare at the eastern end of Colton Street, had seen a car of the size and color in question going eastwards at about the hour the party had left number 12. There seeming nothing abnormal about the vehicle. He had not specially observed it or noted the number, but he had looked at the driver, and the man he described resembled Blessington.
"That's probably it all right," French commented, "but it doesn't help us a great deal. If they were going to any of the stations or steamers, or to practically anywhere in town, this is the way they would pass. Let us try a step further." Keeping in the same general direction, they searched for other men on point duty, but though after a great deal of running backwards and forwards, they found all in the immediate neighborhood that the car would have been likely to pass, none of them had noticed it. "We've lost them, I'm afraid," French said at last. "We had better go back to the yard. As soon as that description gets out, we may have news at any minute." A quarter of an hour later, they passed once more through the corridors of the great building which houses the CID and reached French's room. There, sitting waiting for them, was the melancholy private detective, Speedwell. He rose as they entered. "Afternoon, Mr. French. Afternoon, Mr. Cheyne," he said ingratiatingly, rubbing his hands together. "I got your message, Mr. French, and I thought I'd better call round. Of course I'll tell you anything I can to help." French beamed on him. "Now that was good of you, Speedwell. Very good. I'll not forget it. Did Simmons tell you what had happened?" "Not in detail, only that Blessington, Syme, and the Dangles were wanted." "Well, Mr. Cheyne here and Miss Merrill were out there last night." He shook his head reproachfully at Cheyne, while a twinkle showed in his eyes. "And your friends got hold of Miss Merrill, and we can't find her. Mr. Cheyne they enticed into the house with a fair story. They led him to believe that Miss Merrill would be in her studio when he got back to town, and gave him her purse, which they said she had dropped. It contained a time bomb, and only the merest chance saved Mr. Cheyne from being blown to bits. There are charges against the quartet of attempted murder of Mr. Cheyne and of abduction of Miss Merrill. Can you help us at all?" Speedwell shook his head. "I doubt it, Mr. French. I doubt it, sir. I found out a little, not very much, but all the information I have is at your disposal." Cheyne stared at him. "But how can that be?" he exclaimed. "You were in their confidence, to some extent at all events. Surely you got some hint of what they were after." Speedwell made a deferential movement, and his smile became still more oily and ingratiating. "Now, Mr. Cheyne, sir, you mustn't think too much of that. That was what we might call in the way of business." He glanced sideways at Cheyne from his little foxy, close-set eyes. "You can't complain, sir, but what I answered your questions, and you'll admit you got value for your money." "I don't understand you," Cheyne returned sharply. "Do you mean that that tale you told me was a lie, and that you weren't employed by these people to find the man who burgled their house?" Speedwell rubbed his hands together more vigorously. "A little business expedient, sir. Merely an ordinary little business expedient. It would be a foolish man who would not display his wares to the best advantage. I'm sure, sir, you'll agree with that." Cheyne looked at him fiercely for a moment. "You infernal rogue," he burst out hotly. "Then your tale to me was a tissue of lies, and on the strength of it you cheated me out of my money. Now you'll hand that £150 back. Do you hear that?"
Speedwell's smile became the essence of craftiness. "Not so fast, sir. Not so fast," he purred. "There's no need to use unpleasant language. You asked for a thing and agreed to pay a certain price. You got what you asked for, and you paid the price you agreed. There was no cheating there." Cheyne was about to retort, but French, suave and courteous, broke in.
"Well, we can talk of that afterwards. I think, Mr. Cheyne, that Mr. Speedwell has made us a satisfactory offer. He says he will tell us everything he knows. For my part, I am obliged to him for that, as he is not bound to say anything at all. I think you will agree that we ought to thank him for the position he is taking up, and to hear what he has to say. Now, Speedwell, if you are ready, take a cigar first and make yourself comfortable."
"Thank you, Mr. French. I am always glad, as you know, sir, to assist the yard or the police. I haven't much to tell you, but here is the whole of it." He lit his cigar, settled himself in his chair, and began to speak. End of chapter 13.